For those of you who don't know me or know us, Zach Billings, co-founder of Wikimotive. We're a boutique marketing agency with a specialization in search. And this webinar is going to be the first in a monthly series. The goal here is to try to bring consistent voice to the state of AI search in particular. AI is obviously a really broad, extremely broad spectrum area of focus in automotive. And there's obviously going to be tons of different ways that it's going to impact dealerships, dealership operations, communication with customers, follow-up, CRM, CDP, and I'm not trying to hit the entirety of the spectrum here. What we're going to focus on is the search perspective. How do we gain more visibility in front of consumers who are interested in doing business with our dealerships? And there's a lot of misunderstanding, and there's a lot of fear of missing out, understandably, right? This is all the rage. It's the top topic. And I think it's important that we continue to peel back those layers of misunderstanding and make sure we're getting down to the root of what is our area of focus as it regards AI search. Where can we actually win? And what's white noise that might cause distraction? Also, what's coming on the horizon? Certainly, there can be very much things in this ecosystem that are not going to serve our bottom line today, but maybe worth the investment for tomorrow. And I think that that's going to be an important evolving part of this space. I want to encourage everybody to use the Q&A feature. I will try to keep an eye on questions that come in. I have a deck that we're going to use for this webinar, but we're not going to necessarily stay firmly on the rails. And if any of you have questions and you want to dive into rabbit holes, I think those can often be really informative, maybe even more informative for everyone else watching, especially if they're reasonably on topic. So use the Q&A. If you have a question, we'll go down rabbit holes. I'll try to leave a little bit of time at the end of the hour and not use up the whole time so that we can do that. And then any questions I don't get to, or if they're far enough off of today's focus that I want to, do some additional research and come back, what we'll do is we'll just add it to the roster for next month's state of AI search, and we'll make sure we cover it then. All right. So we're going to start out with a little bit of concept table setting, if you will. I think I noticed some of the names on here, and I know that a number of you are very familiar with the topic at large, and some of this might be very rudimentary, but I think it always bears going through the safety brief at the beginning of the journey, and then we can dive into the topic a little bit more in depth. So, you've got paid search, organic, local search, you've got GEO and AEO now, and we have to kind of put everything in its place, and I'll define this a little bit better as we go. All right. So organic search, you've got SEO, search engine optimization, you got local SEO, which would be optimizing your Google listings. Paid search, we've got a range of disciplines there from high quality to low quality and everything in between. The two can interact for sure. That's a topic for another time. And then, of course, now there's AI search. That's the focus here. We're talking about how do we show up better in primarily LLMs, so ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, the primary market share leaders at this point. And we'll talk, by the way, about the percentage leadership in that space because the data has something to say about that. And then AEO, just so that we're clear, different people refer to AEO sometimes as an alternative acronym for GEO, which is generative engine optimization. AEO is answer engine optimization, and that can mean showing up in LLMs, or other people talking about it are saying that means showing up in the AI overview on Google. I'm happy with whichever one you'd like to call it. I'm generally referring to AEO as more the AI overview piece, and we'll talk about that. LLMO is large language model optimization. So that's kind of a direct acronym for optimizing for ChatGPT, et cetera. All right. So very quickly, you do a search on traditional search. You've got paid at the top. You've got a map pack below that. You've got traditional below that, right? And studies, there's citations down at the bottom that you guys can totally check out. There are recent studies that range the top organic position. I've got it at 30% here. That's a bit of an average between the two studies there. One of them says 28, the other says 40%. The map pack, it'll vary a little bit depending on what was the keyword. And paid search depends on the keyword again. You can see some results climb as high as like 5% click-through rate. But these are click-through rates is the point here. And this is the percentage of people that performed a search in the traditional environment that'll click through on these things. And I think this is really important because while the topic of today's webinar is supposed to be AI search, we need to compare it to something. We need to frame it inside of the search ecosystem to understand what is our available opportunity, right? So, for clarity, if somebody types in the store name, you get a GBP card that takes over, and there is no map pack in that case. So that's most of the click throughs if that exists. And then there's AI overview. So this doesn't show up for a lot of searches that people assume it would show up for. Okay. So let me go ahead and not just use slides for this. And I'll demonstrate what I mean. So if we put in the keyword Ford dealers, I'm located in Rockwall, Texas right now. So I should get results that are local to me, right? And we've got the vehicle listing ads at the top. That makes sense. We've got a map pack. Makes sense. And we've got organic. Makes sense. No AI overview. Okay. And if we specify this a bit more, we do best for dealerships. Sometimes you can get an AI overview to show up when you search that way, but in this case, there is not one. All right. Now let's do F-150 for sale. Vehicle listing ads, paid, map pack, organic, no AI overview. Okay. And then F-150 towing capacity. Uh-huh. So we do still have some paid search here so that if this person is low funnel, potentially they can engage with these local to me vehicle listing ads, and that's smart. And then below that, we've got a piece of an AI overview. Okay. So the AI overview, and what I want everyone to understand about this is the reason this says less than 1% is not that people don't ever engage with AI overview. It's that when we're talking about low funnel keywords, and we're going to expand upon that in 1 second, it's an incredibly small number of the keywords that a consumer would search where they're looking for inventory or a dealership that even show an AI overview, and therefore the click-through rate percentage is incredibly small. All right. LLMs, for their part, I will back up this 0.5% in a minute with quite a bit of data. But basically, what you need to know is as a whole ecosystem, all of search, right? Traditional search, AI overview, LLMs represents about 0.5%. All right. So we're going to expand upon all of that and put it kind of things in their proper places. I do want to make sure I specify that this is not intended to be a webinar about why AI search is a nothing burger. It may be that it's not the amount of opportunity you assume it is right this second, but we're going to talk about some of the nuances and some of the things on the horizon as well. I just want to make sure that everyone gets a factual lay of the land based on the data. All right. So quickly, keywords can be informational. That's high funnel. That's like that towing capacity search I just did. They can be low funnel. That's keywords with dealers or for sale, lease, things like that. They can be branded, which is also transactional for sure, but represents just the name of your store. And the way you need to think about this is a funnel, right? So when people are doing high funnel searches, they're researching. They figure out, do I want this or do I want that? They figure out I am due for an oil change on my RAV4, and they come lower into the funnel, right? Right. So at that point, they're engaging in just a different search terminology. And to be clear, these are phrased like they're Google searches. There's little G's here representing Google searches, but prompts in ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude are just different ways of phrasing this same thing, right? If I want Ram 1500 versus Silverado, to ChatGPT, I might explain, I'm considering buying a truck and I'm thinking about either the Ram 1500 or the Silverado. Can you help me understand key differences and how different trim levels compare to one another? Right? So the thing to understand is that people perform these searches and sometimes they're prompts, but all the same in terms of intent. So when they come down lower in the funnel, whether they're in the Google ecosystem or the LLM, they are now at a point where they're looking for a dealer, they're looking for a place to service their vehicle, they're looking for inventory, and that's where you want to go fishing in that pond. You want to reel that person into your website one way or another. Okay. So then from there, they obviously can convert on your website. That turns into sales. And for clarity, some of the OEMs have been advising dealers that they need to be showing up in like AI overview and LLMs for this high funnel search terminology or prompt terminology. And to that, I would ask you the question, what does that do for your store? What do you accomplish, whether it's traditional Google search or whether it's an LLM? What do you accomplish by showing up for F-150 towing capacity in an organic capacity? You answer their question, perhaps, but did you manage to capture them onto your website? And then if you did, are they local to you? And do they convert? And the answer is if you've got a great blog article on F-150 towing capacity, you won't see any conversions on it because people were too high funnel. All right. So let's talk about the AI side of this. First of all, Conductor, large company, did a study with a lot of data. And I like things that zoom out and look at large swaths of data. It gives us a great sense for what is reality. And I thought it was important to go outside of just our narrow automotive ecosystem when thinking about this information. I've been doing refreshed studies of my own on the state of AI search every 6 months since ChatGPT launched. My first major presentation on it was in early 2023, and then every 6 months since. Now that these are kind of down the road and burning gas, ChatGPT is being used by 50% of US adult consumers at least once a month, about 20% more than 10 times per month. So we've got a significant number of people that are regular users, and that's to say nothing about Gemini or Claude. So the use of large data is now becoming available to us. There are big enough studies that we can start to anchor our assumptions in something beyond assumptions and FOMO, right? So Conductor looked at 3.3 billion sessions. This study was done in 2026, so this is not super stale data. Obviously, it's an evolving space, but anything within the last 6 months is decent, and this is, I believe, about 3 months old now. So they're looking at traffic to all of these websites inside of these 10 different sectors. Okay. Automotive falls in the consumer discretionary sector. All right. So obviously that's a broad ranging list of different sub industries, and automotive will have a slightly different thing than home services or just Best Buy being in there probably somewhere, but it falls in this section. So what these percentages are is they are the percentage of traffic coming to these websites from LLM referrals from ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, etc. So that's 0.5%. And I think that's interesting because our data helps back that up. But before we look at that, I'm going to walk you guys through my complicated, but not all that really complicated infographic explaining why this happens and why it's not a bigger percentage, despite the fact that we've got 50% of people using it monthly, 20% of people using on a very regular basis. I myself am obviously a very heavy user of, in my case, a combination of ChatGPT and Gemini primarily. So if you go to your preferred LLM and you're a consumer, I recently did this. I bought an e-bike for the first time, had no idea what you're supposed to shop for when you're looking for an e-bike, and had to find out what are the features? I don't even know what features I'd be looking for. What are the brands? How reliable are they? Where are they made, right? So think about something that you've bought in your own personal life, and this will start to make a lot of sense. And this is what a consumer does when they don't work in our industry and they're trying to figure out, what am I going to buy? They start with a search like, I want a truck and it needs to be under 60K. What's available? And obviously there's a lot more nuance than this. Anyone who's using an LLM knows that the answer isn't going to be a one sentence answer. Your LLM of choice is going to give you 9 paragraphs and a ton of bullets and different directions to suggest this is an example workflow. So you're looking for a truck. It gives you a list of trucks. Basically, it's all the trucks on the market. And you say, okay, I'm a made in the USA guy. Which ones are made in the United States? Ram 1500, F-150 Tundra. Great. I do a lot of highway driving. Do any of them have hands-free cruise control? Anyone who does long drives, if you've been in like a Tesla with autopilot, it's super cool. And there's a handful of vehicles out there that do it. Those people who are aware of that might ask this question. Well, it turns out the F-150 with Blue Cruise works pretty well. So you start to refine your search and you work your way down this process till you get to the point where you're like, all right, I want an F-150 Lariat around $60,000 with Blue Cruise. Time to go find one. Okay. What are you going to do? If I'm presenting for a live audience, I do an exercise here where I give some kind of incentive so people want to participate, and I poll the room and I say, first one to give me a correct answer wins the whatever, and raise your hand. First person who finds an F-150 Platinum under 80K or an F-150 Lariat under 60K within 25 miles of us. And you'll get a hand that shoots up. And I'll ask, how'd you find that? And it'll be, I Googled it and usually engaged with the vehicle listing ads if it was an inventory search, usually engaged with Map Pack or Organic if it was a dealer search. And no one has yet to raise their hand first and say, I found it on ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude. And I'll ask the room, did anyone try that? And you'll get couple of hands in a room full of 200 people, and it tracks with the data. So that's an anecdote, but it tracks with the data. And the reason is if you try and do these things in your preferred LLM, you try and find a dealer, you say best 4 dealers near Dallas, you'll get an answer. You'll get a list of answers. And you know what? Let's not just sit here and talk about it. Let's look at what this looks like when you try this. So best Ford dealers near Dallas in ChatGPT. So we're going to search the web and we're going to think about it for a second. And here we go. So we've got a list and it's still thinking. And those of you who have tried this with your own stores, you know, sometimes you'll get these are actually good star ratings. It looks like it anchored them in Google search this time. But sometimes you'll get like 2.8 and it's hitting off of the service listing or the Yelp listing or something like that, which is completely wrong. And so this is good. This is solid information. And what it's saying is if you mean genuinely strong reputations. And if you ask ChatGPT, how'd you come up with this? It's reputation based. And sometimes these are the wrong star ratings. This is actionable, but only to a point because it's not really ranked so much as it is basing it off of star rating information and a combination of secondary and tertiary sources. And then if you try that with an inventory search, it gets a little bit more complicated in that the way you phrase it will dictate what you get for quality of results. Sometimes you'll get VDPs, and that's great, but sometimes they're third parties. If you ask it to be dealer resources, they'll be dealer resources most of the time. But it can end up being a mismatch or a slow process. And we all know how to do a Google search. So you have to remember that even if the LLM is capable of coming up with a decent answer to the question, the consumer already knows how to get the right answer faster and more repeatably, more reliably with the deterministic results that come up in a Google search. So that's what the majority of people do. Will this change over time? Maybe. But I'm also going to show you some data on the trajectory of it that will help punctuate the point one way or the other. All right, so anyone who's seen me present on this may have seen some of this data. This is my most refreshed version through earlier this year. We took 217 dealers. Most of these are dealers we work for, but there's some additional ones in the mix here that I've done consulting with. And what you're looking at here in all of these colors is all of the LLMs traffic to these 217 dealers combined minus ChatGPT. ChatGPT is not in this list yet. Okay. Top of the graph is 2 visits per dealer per month. So no one even got to 2 visits per dealer per month from any one of these LLMs. Okay. Negligible amount of traffic. If we add ChatGPT to the exact same graph, all those lines are just pressed down to the bottom. Notice that Gemini and Claude are here, but they get pressed down to the bottom because the people, at least that are consumers doing consumer things that are likely to click through to an endpoint, seem to be more ChatGPT users. ChatGPT doesn't actually have this big a market share advantage overall. Gemini and Claude are definitely catching up. The Super Bowl commercials helped. There's definitely some momentum happening there. Claude with a lot of professionals, ChatGPT with people more familiar with the Google ecosystem, and you've got an influx of people there. It's not this big a spread, but it seems like different people use them for different purposes. Those of you who are more advanced users know not every LLM does different things the same way. Some are better at some things and some are better at others. So your regular consumers seem to be higher propensity ChatGPT. So this is where your low funnel opportunity exists, if it exists. Notice that the top of the graph is 30 visits per dealer per month, or about 1 visit per day. Okay. So we're going to add Bing organic traffic to the same graph. The blue line is now all of the LLMs, not just ChatGPT. And the orange line is traffic from Bing organic to these 217 dealers. Pause for effect. The reality is none of us were staking our success for this year or next year on Bing organic traffic, right? It's pretty much asked and answered at this point. Who is the market share leader in search? It's not Bing. It's not that we don't care about Bing traffic. It's actually visit per visit higher quality than Google on average, but it's a tiny volume compared to Google. So if we add Google to the same graph, here's Google traffic, Bing in orange, and LLMs in blue. You can't see the line lift off the bottom. Okay, so it's a third of a percent of total organic traffic to these 217 dealers, which starts to line up more or less with the conductor study. We did look at conversion rate because that's important. One of the things that I get asked a lot is, yeah, okay, so it's a tiny amount of the total traffic, but what about the conversions? I've heard that LLM traffic converts way more than other forms of traffic, and there's merit in that thought, right? It just logically follows that if somebody has already done all of their research on ChatGPT, right? We go back to this infographic. Somebody's already gone through that whole process. They've gotten themselves a lot lower in the funnel, so their conversion propensity is going to be higher when they've actually figured out what they want to get to. So it makes sense that there would be a higher conversion rate. And across the data set that we looked at, it is a 26% higher conversion rate for LLM traffic than organic traffic. But still compared to 1/200th, less than 1/200th, 1/250th, the traffic volume. So it ends up being that it's a higher conversion rate, but it's negligible in the scheme of the numbers we're talking about. And for clarity, we used click to call and form submissions only for this data set. You have to pick something that you can normalize across 217 dealers. And obviously, we have different digital retailing tools and this and that and the other. So for the data nerds that are watching this, we used a normalized data set so that we could have consistent data across 25 months for 217 dealers. So same thing plotted in conversions, click to calls and forms for clarity. This is the LLM conversions. Here it is with Bing. Here it is with Google. You still can't see the LLM line lift off the bottom, and it's 0.5% lining up with the conductor study. Okay. So what does this mean? It doesn't mean that LLMs are irrelevant. It doesn't mean they have no part in the search ecosystem. It means that if you want a low funnel click through to your website that's going to convert, it's not a matter of just do better GEO. It's not a matter of update your schema markup and presto, you're going to do better. There is more to the story here because there is an underlying consumer habits and consumer behavior component that you don't have control over. There is what Google is better for and what an LLM is better for. Okay. Deep research, figuring out what product you want to buy. LLMs are wonderful for that, and consumers are using it for that purpose in spades. But when it comes to that last mile where you want to go fishing in that transactional layer of the funnel, it's not LLMs, at least today. So let's talk a little bit about the trajectory of this. Again, those of you who are data-oriented people notice something about this. You probably noticed this when I showed the first slide with the ChatGPT traffic on it. It went up, and now it's come down a little bit. And whenever I'm analyzing any form of traffic, right? We could be looking at organic trajectory, as we often do for our clients. We could be looking at paid search. We could be looking at the two combined. We can be looking at LLM traffic. I'm always looking for inflection points. I'm looking for where did something go up? Where did something go down? Where did something take a turn? Because there is almost always something in the data right there, and we need to just go find the cause. We need to go find the smoking gun that triggered that. So to my eyes, I saw three major inflection points here. There's kind of another one here with this hump, but that doesn't materially matter. It turns out that's a bit more just kind of noise in the data. What I saw was where it lifts off the bottom, where it begins to hockey stick upward a little bit, and where it comes over the top. Okay. There may be something else materializing in early 2026. We need a little bit more time to let that mature and get some distance down the road. So I researched this and I looked into what happened at these points in time, because I highly doubt that it was just that 217 dealers suddenly had better GEO, right? They're on all different website platforms, all different markets, different situations, different things in play, right? So you're not going to see that in macro data. And first data point, OpenAI launched links. So back in late 2024, we went from a time when if you did something on ChatGPT, there were no links to now maybe there were links, depending on if you were a user that got that feature early. Fast forward a little bit, and yes, more consumers were using LLMs. That's part of what was causing all of this lift. But the reason for the hockey stick right there is not that from March to April, all of a sudden, way more people started using ChatGPT. It was that they fully rolled out the link feature, where now you could see the link through to the cited resource that they got that information from. And so some more people are going to naturally click on that, right? And then that continues to climb at that point based on increase in usership, right? That's more people adopting LLMs into their regular professional workflow, personal workflow. And then at the top, what happened was OpenAI again changed their linking ecosystem. And if you think back, if anyone here was a regular ChatGPT user in throughout 2025, think back. It used to be for a while that like almost every bullet, almost every small paragraph, couple of sentences had a citation link, and today they're a little bit more sparse than that. They thinned it out, which makes sense because people don't find it all that useful to have like tons and tons and tons and tons of them visible. And so what they did is they thinned it out. They made it so that it was a bit more user friendly. Like, here's a paragraph of information. Here's the primary thing that you would want to click through to. And they also started thinking a little bit more about what would an authority resource look like. So, for instance, if we go back to that search I did on ChatGPT, right? We've got Reddit here. Reddit is definitely a resource that is used. One of the questions I get a lot, and we may or may not get to it today, is can we use Reddit for GEO? The answer is maybe, but it's complicated. We've got Carfax, we've got DealerRater, and if you do an inventory search, you'll often get third parties. Why? Not because the dealers in the mix are necessarily poorly optimized or not technically visible, but because Cars.com and AutoTrader and Edmunds have more F-150s than you do. It's as simple as that. It's also why Google gives preferential treatment in organic results to the third parties. It doesn't mean a dealer can't break into that. It just means that you have to have great SEO, and all things being equal, inventory volume will win. So bottom line is they distilled down the number of links and also the number of resources that they will likely link to. And that has caused a cooling off in the traffic. We've kind of gotten through the major adoption curve. This is another thing that everyone should keep in mind. You have more than 50% of US consumers who are using an LLM at this point. So you're through early adoption, right? You're through the rapid influx that happens at the beginning of new technologies. And this can be modeled, right? We were looking at what's called quadratic lift. It's not exponential, but it's every month that elapses, it was a square function of the number of months elapsed. Okay, so up until the end of 2025, it was rising at a quadratic rate, and that was something you could model into the future. It also really well fit with what studies observe of other technologies that have gained rapid adoption over time. So very often what you'll see is it's actually an S curve. You'll see quadratic lift for the earliest part of consumer adoption into a new technology. Then it starts to plateau, come over the top, and it makes an S shape. Okay. So we're through the upward ramp at the beginning is what it's looking like. Doesn't mean that people are not using LLMs. It doesn't mean they're abandoning them. Far from it. Right? It just means we're through the mass adoption cycle at the beginning. So you should expect that it's going to be more steady from here as opposed to just an exponential climb to the moon. And I think this is where the conversation is getting lost in the sauce a whole bunch. There's this constant assumption that AI will be everything, and maybe that's true, but we're through mass adoption. So it's going to be a steady climb from here. Okay. And then we're on a new floor as of this data. Obviously, some months have elapsed since then. And it's not like it just rose back to the moon. I will update this periodically, and in one of the future months of this webinar, I will be sure to bring an updated copy of this. We're going to have to see where it goes from here. And the bottom line is it's not going to overtake traditional search immediately. Now, I am going to come back to when we talk about visibility scores and things in a few minutes. I'm going to come back to the notion that there are searches that don't need to produce a click through. The one I gave you as an example on ChatGPT would be an example of that, right? Just because I'm not going to click through to Five Star Ford or to, well, we've got that twice there, Planet Ford, right? I'm not going to click through on these directly out of ChatGPT necessarily, but they still got some branding credit here. So I might choose to then Google one of these and go pursue it that way, right? So there's still brand visibility that needs to be taken into account. Visibility needs to be taken into account, but carefully, and we need to calibrate our expectations. Okay, so I don't think this is the end of the story, and I don't think that only click-throughs and direct conversions are what matter, but it's important to keep it in context. Okay. AI overview, I already covered that, but I just want to repunctuate the point that you are not going to get any material value out of showing up in AI overviews as a citation. Like great blog articles get cited in AI overviews, and it's cool and fine if you have that citation. All the time, we get our clients cited in AI overviews with great blog articles, but the blog article wasn't the point of the thing that was being done. We weren't trying to do it for AEO. We weren't even making that the main point of the SEO. The point was to support other work and to show up better for keywords like F-150 for sale. So the important thing to understand here is if you show up in an AI overview, it almost certainly was high funnel. And therefore, if you get any traffic from that, it doesn't matter, doesn't convert. So please, I implore everybody, move on from the notion of AI overview mattering to your bottom line. It really isn't going to. All right. So pressing on, GEO, LLMO, AEO. So AEO, if you consider AEO to be the AI overview in Google, that's what you're thinking about. Understand that the ranking factors that impact SEO and Google's organic rankings are almost identical to what will get you cited in an AI overview. There is a little bit of difference. It's not necessarily that the cited resource in AI overview is position one organic. It can vary a little bit based on did you have the information curated into an easy to understand format, consolidated into basic paragraphs, FAQs, things like that. You've all heard about that. If you're on this webinar, you probably know that. And the bottom line here is that in the AEO space, if you're talking about the AI overview, which shouldn't matter to you, then SEO practices are the name of the game there. Add some FAQs. That's about as much as you should need to know there. The thing to understand, and I think based on the feedback I've been getting from a lot of people, there's a lot more awareness of this spreading at this point, that SEO fundamentals are GEO fundamentals. Great quality content, authority building, the fundamentals of technical SEO and site health and crawlability, HTML that doesn't turn your website into gobbledygook when ChatGPT is trying to parse it. These are the most important things. So if you're focusing on your SEO fundamentals and you're focusing on building authority, you are 95% of the way to GEO. Now, can you eke out some more gains? Yes, you can. But the factors that impact this are still up for debate, and many of them are not turning out to be as impactful as once assumed. Okay. So reputation is the number one thing. And I basically full stop. If it's an inventory search, that's a different issue. I'll get into that in a second. But when it's like best for dealer near Dallas or something like that, it's reputation that's going to decide how you show up. Cross-platform reputation, definitely to an extent. But if you ask ChatGPT, Gemini, it's their own ecosystem, the number one thing is going to be your Google reviews. And then it's also going to take into account Yelp and DealerRater and potentially Reddit threads. But your reputation, by and large, is going to decide how well you show up in a best dealer kind of search. So I implore everybody to accept and internalize that you're going to have to focus more heavily on the way that consumers feel about our dealership to be able to future-proof yourself in this space. And it's going to become more and more and more difficult to hide. Anyone who's a regular user of Amazon probably knows that if you go down to the reviews section on Amazon, you no longer have to read the reviews. Rufus, which is they're about to deprecate it, but it's the name of their AI, helper, gives you a summary. It's a paragraph and it's got a bunch of checkboxes, dashes or X's to basically say, these are things people say are good. These are things people say are so-so. These are things that people consistently say are bad. And you can just read the paragraph and it's a distillation of all of the reviews. That's what an LLM is from a dealership reputation perspective. And what you have to realize is that if you're getting common complaints, and this is where, doing an anecdotal search of yourself on an LLM is probably a good thing to do. Like, go search what is it like to do business with ABC Motors and see what it says. And then ask it, what are the common complaints? See what it says. Those are the things that you need to really work on from a process standpoint. And I think for some dealerships that I've looked at, it's going to be like a fundamental redirect of how they do business with their consumers. For others, it'll just be keep trying to do more of the same because we're already focused on those things. But understand that like that old, quote from the Social Network, the movie about Facebook, that the internet is written in ink. Reviews are, and it's getting to the point where now LLMs can curate that easily and surface to the top the common problems, even if they happened a ways back in the past, but you need to keep on burying that with fresh stuff, right? So reputation is really going to matter to your GEO, because the main thing that you actually have the ability to change is going to be how you get represented as a dealer sentiment in those answers that then drives if somebody decides to Google 5-star Ford, North Richland Hills, 5-star Ford of Dallas, Planet Ford, or whatever else. Okay. Behind that is, let's just say, technical components of your website. It is increasingly looking like schema markup is a nothing burger, and that all of the work that gets poured into trying to update it doesn't lead to any significant gain in terms of visibility in LLMs. There are going to be exceptions to that rule. I'm painting with a fairly broad brush when I say that, but there is a disproportionate amount of effort going into technical markup that is difficult to implement with the majority of the website vendors, not all of them, and very little gain coming out on the other end, right? So we're analyzing what we see showing up well in LLMs versus what isn't. And in future installations of this webinar, I'm going to bring more of the data that we're surfacing on this because it's becoming high volume enough to become interesting and to understand which knobs and levers are doing what. And we're looking at, sites with good schema, sites with bad schema. It's not making a difference. And if you ask ChatGPT, like, how's the schema on this VDP? It'll basically tell you garbage or non-existent. And then if you ask it to write you what the schema should be, it'll write it. And if you ask, like, how did you know that was an F-150 Lariat with this many miles and this price and these offer details, it'll say, I can look at the page, I can understand the code. That's primarily what's actually being looked at. And so I did an interesting exercise where I looked at a number of dealers and I tested a number of searches asking about incentives, which is interesting. So one of the ways that somebody would potentially use an LLM that's a little bit more outside of the typical area that people think about, but is a great use case for an LLM if it does its job, is to ask it to find inventory in your region, which has the best incentives, best discounts, right? Because as a consumer, you don't want to go sifting through 7 different Ford dealerships in your metro area trying to figure out who has the best incentives on, comparable trim F-150s, right? So what you could instead do is just ask the LLM to do that work for you. Now, they don't do a good job of it. So the consumer may get frustrated and not bother trying to do that after the first couple of attempts, but they don't do a good job of it because the clarity of our pricing data is in need of improvement. Those dealer groups on the call who have been more wrapped up in the FTC stuff, actually, you're probably further ahead on getting clarity in this, but you may still have a problem that you don't realize in that if you have a tool, there are plenty of great digital retailing tools, plenty of website vendors who work hard to have the pricing box show up in a visually appealing way. But very often that pricing box or that digital retailing tool, the way it's coded is obfuscating the offer details, which makes it very difficult for an LLM to parse what the actual offer is and what the bottom line price is, and they get it wrong very easily. So I actually, speaking of the search that I just did on ChatGPT, One of the dealers that popped up when I was doing this exercise was Five Star Ford of Dallas as one that was showing up with good offers. They didn't actually necessarily have or significantly better offers than the other dealers in my market. But when I started probing at why they were showing up, Giselle, which is not a website platform that many people talk about all of that much, they were showing up well because they had a simple HTML price box that made it very easy to understand. They hadn't buried it in a box of code that made it difficult. So, what I'm getting at is best insert your make here dealer, that kind of a prompt, your reputation is the dominant force. Find me X vehicle near me, or find X vehicle near me under a certain price, find X vehicle near me with good lease incentives or monthly payment. It's going to come down to if the answer to that question that you want served is visible clearly and in an HTML coded way that makes sense to the LLM. I don't claim to be a developer or a coder, and I'm not trying to tell you. There's probably somebody on this webinar right now that's like, Zach, this like I could do this in 5 seconds. Can you on your website platform? Give me a call and tell me how. So as far as I can tell, that's going to be one of the big differentiators, but that still depends on, and I've waxed on this for a minute here, right? Still depends on how many people, back to this graph, are actually using the LLMs that low funnel, and are you going to get a return from your tinkering with your code structure? Yet to be seen, I would say. All right. So let's talk about AI visibility scores for a second. If anybody would like me to run their visibility score for their dealership, go ahead and put it in the Q&A what domain you'd like me to run. I'll give this like 2 seconds to see if anything pops up. And if not, I'll just pick a store and we'll run with it. And I'm going to show you guys some of what you need to be aware of when you're getting Smart Toyota. Hey, Tony. All right. So let's do smarttoyota.com. And Tony, I'm going to tell you before I hit enter, don't fall out of your chair because you're a client. You're about to see a bad score. Okay. And then we're going to explain to everybody why it's a problem. All right. Running. This is SEM Rush. Well, it's loading, apparently. It's usually a little bit faster than this. There's a handful of tools that can do this. Profound is one that comes up a lot. It has a problem in that it cannot do location specific. There is no way within Profound to tighten up the location. And I'll show you what that means in a second here when we do SEM Rush. But SEM Rush has, as far as we've found, the most mature AI visibility tracking tool set in the search industry as a whole. And we use it for SEO purposes, for rank tracking and mining for opportunity and figuring out what we need to do differently on the SEO side. They went ahead and got ahead of the curve, and they've put together a pretty good tool set for AI, but the visibility tracking piece, maybe not so much. I'm going to keep on trying to reload this. Okay, I'm getting booted because we've got, apparently, it thinks I'm already logged in. There we go. Okay, Tony, stay in your chair. 24 out of 100. Now let's refine that to the United States, 26. We could even do a specific platform, 25, right? So a couple of things I want to point out to everybody before I show you what makes this score. First, you've probably received one of these in your inbox from a vendor. It is their attempt to sell you something based on FOMO. I'm about to explain to you why you don't need to react harshly to that information, even if maybe there is opportunity to be gained. Okay. So I got a couple of these recently, and I had a dealer, in particular that comes to mind, and they were like, the website vendor sent me an AI visibility score, and it was 30. And I ran it in here. I refined it to United States and ChatGPT, and it was 30. Almost guarantee you most people who are producing these are doing them out of here and skinning it in some way or another. There are other platforms that do it too. They're all going to operate on similar methodology. Okay. So first of all, you've got worldwide, you've got US. And so the thing that you need to understand is if you try to like go here and type in, so in my area, like Dallas, nothing there. You cannot put in a city at this layer. And in order to have access to this tool at all, we only pay $100 a month to have this seat have access to this tool. So it's dirt cheap to be able to get to the visibility score thing and make a report. However, if I wanted to do custom tracking, it's $100 a month per domain plus additional costs for keyword credits or prompt credits. So it can balloon very fast if you want to track this in a more granular way. So this tool, SEMrush, it can do tracking down to the city level, but it cannot do that at this just platform-wide subscription level, which is how vendors are producing these scores for people. So like if ABC vendor who wants your business is producing an AI visibility score, they're not going to pay $200 to do it. Their opportunity cost doesn't line up well enough there. They're not going to take that chance. It just balloons the cost too much, so they won't do it that way. They're going to use something along these lines. And so here's what's up. ChatGPT, AI Overview, AI Mode, and Gemini are all within this data set. We're doing US specific because that's as far as we can go here. And now if we scroll down, we're going to go to topic opportunities. This is what they're going to get dinged on, right? So Tony, this is what you're getting dinged on. We do have a couple of competitors in here. This is probably more specific than it would be for most of the dealers I do this for, because we also have tracking in here for Tony's SEO. And if we look at the prompts, 510,000 prompts. That's a really big number. SEMrush has a catalog of pre-established prompts that are just in the system, and it does its best to line up the ones that it, for some reason, thinks based on some internal decision making would align to a Toyota dealer, which we just put in. Toyota.com, mind you, is also being considered a competitor here. That is not relevant because Toyota, their job as tier one is tier one visibility. Our job at tier three is get people from the transactional layer. Okay. And then look at these prompts, ignoring language issues. So we're just going to overlook the fact that, we've got things in Japanese or Mandarin or whatever. 100 famous logos with names. I don't know why that has anything to do with Toyota. Let's just go 10 pages deep. We've got, again, other languages here, cars and manufacturing, countries. What does that even mean, right? So we'll go 100 pages deep. And all right, so now we're going to see some geographies. And I am not seeing geographies relevant to Tony's store. And good Lord, when is the next Five Finger Death Punch concert in my city? Right? So does everyone see here, I hope, why these are not relevant to a Toyota dealer and why getting dinged on this visibility is a major problem if we're trying to trust that 26 out of 100 is a reason to go hire a vendor to help you with this. And then if we go to competitor research, this is usually interesting. Right. So in the NFL and college football schedules and scores topic, competitor brands are mentioned, but yours isn't. Damning. So the thing that everyone needs to understand is that AI visibility tracking may have a place in what you should be thinking about doing. But to take one of these visibility scores that you're given and decide that something is critically wrong is missing a lot of the contextual information that needs to be understood before you make a decision based upon that. Again, never minding the fact that not a lot of people by volume are actually using LLMs for that last mile search. Okay. So back to my slides here. I'm going to skip ahead here. And just for one of our dealers that we're doing tracking for, this is how you should actually do this. And SEMrush is capable of doing this. But like I said, we're essentially paying $200 a month to run this as a pilot per domain. Okay. So it balloons quickly. And actually a vendor has every reason to charge you for it if they're doing it properly because they have a hard cost. So in this store's case, we're going to track down to the Houston city, right? I don't care about even the state of Texas or all of the United States. It needs to be city specific. We're going to we're going to use one platform only because we want to try and remove noise. We could do multiple platforms, but do them individually, right? So that we're getting a clear sense of what our signals are. Different LLMs are going to respond to different things. Right now, I would use the market share leader, which is ChatGPT. Your competitors need to not include national brands or the OEM. And here's the most important part. The prompts need to be curated. Tell me about in this case, Keating Chevrolet, or Tony, you gave me Smart Toyota. So tell me about Smart Toyota. Tell me about the best Chevy dealers near Houston. Tell me about the best Ford dealers near Dallas, right? It needs to be specific to what you care about, right? It's not 510,000 prompts from a random catalog. It needs to be specific to your store. Best selection of used, insert the model here under whatever price would make sense, and a selection of those. So we're tracking a range of specific curated prompts for this dealer and a few others to test and to understand. And some of the information I'll bring in future webinars is what are we seeing for commonalities? And there aren't a whole lot of commonalities showing up yet, I will tell you. There's the issue of answers being probabilistic. So you can search the same thing 5 times in a row and get 5 different answers, and it varies even more across multiple days or weeks. So we're collecting this data over time. We're looking at which website platforms show up most commonly, but you have to normalize that for like, if for Chevy dealers, one website platform is going to be more common than for Toyota dealers, et cetera, right? So you have to normalize that. And we're looking at, is there inventory on the page? Is there content on the page? What's the schema markup look like? So we're looking at over just weeks, thousands of data points, and we're going to be looking for commonalities. I will surface those as we see them. And we don't mind talking about this publicly, just like with our SEO. There's no secret sauce in all of this. This is a data collection, and anyone can theoretically do these things. You just need access to the data. We like sharing that information. I'm going to be bringing more of that in future webinars. And at the end of the day, the thing to understand here is that this does not produce an AI visibility score. So for Keating Chevrolet, for instance, there is no score produced by this. Each individual prompt has you're in this position or you don't show up at all. And here are the entities that are showing up, and we're grading those. Okay. So AI visibility score is not a thing. Finally, I'm going to wrap this one up, and then we can look and see if you guys have any Q&A you want to answer in the last couple minutes. The ad space. I get a lot of questions about this. What about ads in LLMs, right? Earlier when I did that search for F-150 towing capacity in Google, we saw vehicle listing ads at the top. Okay. That's interesting, right? Because this person, me in this case, is doing a research search, but we are getting some paid transaction forward local results in there. So if this person is thinking about an F-150 purchase, maybe if one of these aligns with that search, you click through. Will the click-through rate be high on these? No, it won't be. But it makes sense that it would be aligned that way. So think about that in the LLM context. ChatGPT is running an ad beta right now. During a seminar I did recently, I got to see my first ever Carvana ad live in the wild in a ChatGPT search from one of the people that was in the room. And right now it's a closed beta. So only national brands, national advertising firms are able to participate in this. And so some of them, there is some rumor buzz around, like some of these firms might be letting people kind of backdoor their way in by hooking on to their participation in the beta. But bottom line is, a dealership cannot just go advertise in ChatGPT right now. The spend requirements are huge. The platform is massively immature, and realistically, you need to be doing national advertising to show up there. By 2027, at some point, I bet that we're going to have a kind of minimum viable product for a dealer-facing or vendor-facing ad platform. So probably sometime next year, you may be able to advertise in ChatGPT. I would imagine at that point, it's going to be like text ads or traditional SEM in Google. And then it'll probably take a little bit longer for them to be able to ingest inventory catalogs, which I think will be where the rubber really starts to meet the road, where you start to get vehicle cards as a response to something like a high funnel search. Someone's putting in Ram 1500 versus Silverado, and you can get your Silverados in there. I see an opportunity there. So that's where I think this will start to crack open, but they are doing this slowly, methodically, because ChatGPT needs to be careful not to erode trust. They have the market share leadership position right now, but they will lose it to Gemini in a heartbeat, and Google is flush with cash. So they have said no ads coming to Chat or to Gemini for the time being. When it happens, it'll just start to happen as part of a bleed over from Google Ads, I guarantee you. And I would say both of these are probably 2028 before you're really going to be doing ads inside of LLMs. It's coming. It's not here yet. I hope everybody found this informative. If anybody wants to drop any questions in our last 5 minutes, I'm happy to throw some answers out there. Otherwise, we'll definitely come back next month, June 8th at noon Eastern. It's a Monday. Put it on your calendar. We're going to do another iteration of this. Each one of these, I'll refresh a couple of the major points from before, and then we're going to try and bring some fresh data and make it that much more interactive over time so you guys can get your questions answered.